Okay, so a bit later than planned, here's the Rugby World Cup review video. Now, things I took out of the World Cup, crowd numbers were good. The French locals really brought in to the tournament. There was a lot of locals turned up, which was fantastic, and fans travelled well from all around the world to support their teams, which was really good to see. There were some ticketing issues, which is a concern because obviously the French have got the Olympics next year, and we've seen ticketing issues at French stadiums in major football tournaments in the past as well, and major like Champions League finals as well. So that's an ongoing issue with French sporting events, which is a concern. There were not many major issues with ticketing, but there were some stadiums early on in the pool stages that had problems. So that was noted. Um, Team performances. Some teams really impressed me, and some teams really disappointed. I was really impressed with Portugal and the way they applied themselves in the pool stages, getting that first ever win and beating Fiji, a team that made the quarterfinals. England, I think, overperformed. I think that's a fair assessment. I don't think many England fans would have expected them to make a semi-final and finish third overall, with the form going into the tournament and the issues which Steve Borthwick was facing. But they overachieved. I think there's going to be a bit of a bounce back to earth. I think in the Six Nations that we'll see how they do in the Six Nations. Wales, I think, were average. Again, much like England, I think they slightly overachieved. I think that Australia game, though, I think papers over some cracks that the Welsh team has. This is a team in transition. A lot of players have decided to hang up their boots at international level and retire. So they're a team in transition as well. But they got to the knockout stages, which was important. I feel sorry for Scotland and Italy to a certain extent with the pools they were in. They showed some real good glimpses of what they are capable of and what they're planned to do in years to come. I think the Italians, I think, are a sleeper on us in the Six Nations. I think the Italians will surprise some of us next spring. Scotland, I know they were seeded fifth overall and they were the fifth ranked team in the world, but that was a pool of death. A big side was going to fail to get out. Ireland failed to get past the quarter final yet again. I think they peak too soon. That's a debate that we've we've been having now online. Is did the Irish peak too soon in the Six Nations? Same with the French. Same with the French. But that quarter final, I mean, that wasn't. That was difficult, really. With the way they beat the All Blacks on the opening night, you're thinking this French side can build some momentum and go on a nice deep run into the latter stages of the tournament, and it wasn't to be, which was a shame. Now Dupont did obviously have that bad cheek and jaw injury and missed a few games, which I think unsettled the team a little bit. How fit was he for that quarter final? The debate's still out. The All Blacks and the Springboks making the final. Not surprising, but I wouldn't have thought that was the final people would have actually had money on, personally. The All Blacks looking a bit more human, losing two games at a World Cup for the first time. Springboks, now the most successful side in World Cup history. In the last two World Cups, they've lost a game. And they've lost a game and then gone on to win. Sides that really disappointed me. Georgia, I was really disappointed with Georgia. I expected more from them. Japan, slightly disappointing as well. Chile, it was their first World Cup, so you take out of that what you want, but they gave it a go in every game they played. You can just see the step up that they need to continue to develop, but they've developed really well to this point. It's that now, that next 4 year cycle and that next step. Can they return in 4 years' time, or will it be like Portugal where they take a 16-year absence? We hope that's not the case. Uruguay were a good value for money. They've really developed over the last decade. And that's the level that Chile want to be at is Uruguay's level, being more competitive in the pool stages, winning games, challenging to win more games, and really unsettling the tier one nations. Uruguay is a blueprint for a tier two nation, really. Same with Fiji, they are the blueprints for tier two nations. Samoa and Tonga really disappointed from the other Pacific Island nations. And then we get to Australia. This is the big one. I've never seen an Australian side, a Wallaby side, play so badly. And Eddie Jones is gone as coach, so they're on looking now for their third coach in a calendar year. We can do a separate video on the situation with Australia in due course. But that performance against Fiji was worrying. But the performance against Portugal wasn't great. The performance against Georgia was misfiring. But then the Wales game, and this is not a great Wales side. This Wales side, I think, overachieved a little bit by making the quarterfinals, considering their form leading in to the tournament. That was diabolical by Australia. And they're hosting in 4 years' time. I mean, what state is the Wallabies going to be in 4 years' time? Player development, grassroots, who's going to be the coach? A whole load of questions about the Wallabies setup, the structures of Rugby Australia, and the issues the sport faces down under. But that was the big highlight of failure at this World Cup. I think it ranks as even worse than England in 2015. That was absolutely dreadful what the Australians dished up. I feel sorry for a lot of those younger players because it was a very inexperienced squad. But questions have to be asked of the selectors. Questions have to be asked of the appointment of Eddie Jones as head coach. And their form leading in was diabolical. They only won 2 Test matches this year, and that was in the pool stages against Portugal and Georgia. Let that sink in. And they weren't convincing against those nations either. So let that sink in. They were really poor, really, really poor. Other things that I picked out of this World Cup: the TMO review system for yellow and red cards. Not a fan of it. Too inconsistent. And it seemed as the tournament went on, they became less strict until the final, until Sam Cane gets sent off. They really weren't pinging players for head contact that were getting sin binned and sent off in the pool stages. So much inconsistency, so much, controversy around missed calls. Give power back to the on-field referees. Why fiddle with a system that was working reasonably well before they bring this in? This is a reactionary rule change by World Rugby. I'm not a fan of it. There are those who are, but I'm not a fan of it. So many inconsistent decisions there. No consistency. If it's a red, let the referee give it a red on the field. If it's a yellow, let the referee give it a yellow on the field. And then if post-match there is an appeals process, that is fine. It's fine. Why keep? This is what annoys me with World Rugby: is these constant tinkerings with the rules every year. In the next World Cup in 4 years' time, the rules are going to be different yet again, and that is a problem. Yes, player safety is vitally important. Getting the tackle area right is vitally important. But the scrums are still a mess. The ruck and mauls are still a mess. There's illegal clear-outs that are getting missed all the time. They're focusing on the tackle area and certain aspects of the clear-out in regards to head contact. But we need to have more refereeing by common sense and give more power back to the on-field officials. They're the ones who have a feel of the game, if there's any spite or malice in the game. Yeah, I don't think that new TMO review system has worked as intended. I think it adds more time onto the game. It disrupts the flow of the game. And we're spending more time now with video refs deciding decisions than on-field refs, and it completely changes how the game is played. That's my personal opinion on that. And people can disagree, and that's perfectly fine, but I'm not a fan of it. I don't think it was implemented particularly well, and we've got a lot of coaches scratching their heads going, that's not a red, that's not a yellow. That call was missed, and there's a lot of coaches blowing up in press conferences. There's a lot of media blowing up when they're doing their TV programs or writing articles saying, well, that makes no sense. And some of the decisions World Rugby are taking are very reactionary. Other sports are being more pro-actionary in regards to head contacts and player welfare with rule changes. That seems like a very reactionary rule change, and I do question what World Rugby are doing at times. Let's just keep it as that. I will say this though about also the promotion and the advertising in the build up to the World Cup and such. Not a lot of it. Not a lot of not as much as in previous World Cups. Not as well publicised as it could be into the build up. Um, we knew it was coming. It just wasn't how many new casual viewers have become rugby union fans because of this tournament, watching on TV, that kind of thing. What else? There's a few other bits and pieces. A few other bits and pieces. Let's have a think. Let's have a think. Let's have a think, shall we? Um, the national anthems as well, and the pool stages. The opening weekend were a bit shambolic. That's another one. I really appreciate the youth choir of disadvantaged kids. That was fantastic, but I think they got the music wrong and how they set that up early on. They made changes to that throughout the tournament because they got criticised. Um, Also, length of tournament. A lot of fans were starting to tune out. There were, and I noticed on my viewership figures on the channel. Viewers were tuning out. It does drag on a long time, and of course they're planning to expand the tournament and change the group pool stage structure as well. It was a long tournament. It does go on a bit. Of course, player welfare and the amount of games players have got to play in the pool stages, and then you get to the knockout stages, a game a week. Scheduling started to be fixed, I think, by World Rugby, but the length of the tournament is one of those where it does drag on, and there are still blowout scores as well that we've seen in the pool stages. So maybe it's great that the game has expanded internationally, but the length of time the World Cup drags on is something that has been brought up a lot on social media from sports fans. Is it's a long tournament. Um, it is a long tournament, and maybe potentially start the tournament a little bit earlier. But then the weather had an impact. We had water breaks, which we haven't had in a Northern Hemisphere World Cup before. It was very, very warm in across Western Europe at the start of the tournament. We had like a mini heat wave. Um, how the weather's changed. It's been horrendous weather the last couple of weeks, but at the beginning of the tournament there were water breaks. That was something to be noted. That is climate is changing. But we need to look at the length of the tournament, and with expanding it, will that mean an extra week? Will that mean even longer tournament? Can that keep that fans' attention? Considering that the final eight, all those teams have been in the knockout stages before, um, and out of them, you had all but one of the previous World Cup winners were in the knockout stages. So it was the same nations get through to the latter stages, which is something else that needs to be thought about. Is why are the same nations making it to semi-finals and finals and quarter-finals all the time? Um, there has to be a point where another nation breaks through and hits the knockout stages at some point if the game is truly to grow on a global level. But look, South Africa, New Zealand, yes, there's a lot of debate about the refereeing of Wayne Barnes and the TMO and such in the final. But we were having debates about referee consistency from the opening night between France and New Zealand all the way through to the South Africa New Zealand final. We do need to look at that TMO review system. I don't think World Rugby have got that right, but there we go. But overall, I was not overly disappointed with the tournament. But even I was getting tournament fatigue by the quarter-final, semi-final stage. I did not watch every game, which I planned to do when the tournament started. I got tournament fatigue as well. But I also took a little bit of break from creating content for personal reasons, which I've discussed in videos on the channel. But I was starting to get a bit of tournament fatigue and just, I wouldn't say lost interest, but I was needing a break from watching it. And if you are a hardcore rugby fan and not a hardcore sports fan like I am, you do sometimes get that kind of fatigue aspect where you're thinking this tournament's going on a long time. This is a fear I have about other major sporting events like the expanded Football World Cup, for example. With more teams being added and more games getting played, there's going to be a point of saturation and sporting fatigue. So maybe Rugby need to look at the scheduling. I know they're going to expand the tournament and change the pool structure, so make the pools a bit smaller. But we need to potentially look at scheduling, kick-off times, maybe move the tournament forward a little bit, maybe delay it a little bit. So we'll see how that all plays out. But I thought it was a decent advert for the game, but there's always going to be some controversy, and a lot of it's to do with the rule changes, and a lot of old school rugby fans going, the sport is changing too much. This is not the sport that I played or watched 10, 20 years ago. And while sport and rules evolve, I think World Rugby continue with too many rule changes, which then impacts the viewing joy of fans. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts on the Rugby World Cup in the comment section below, and I'll have some more content for you very, very soon.